Well, this morning I'm going to be talking about divine order. Do any of you remember the name of a man? Paul Harvey, maybe. Yes, among the more seniors of us, maybe. Maybe not. But this was a man who had such a popular radio show years and years ago, God bless him. Now, the format of the show was pretty consistent. Paul would start by telling a story, and it might be about some mysterious or unknown person or some not so very interesting event, but then he would say something like, "But wait till you hear the end of the story." And if memory serves me, that's where they had a commercial break, because you were waiting, anxiously to hear what the end of the story is. And after that commercial break, he would always have a surprise ending, something completely unexpected. And this ordinary event would turn out to be an extraordinary one, or this ordinary person would turn out to be someone just very famous. But there was always this astonishing ending. And people loved his stories. He was very, very popular. I want to give you an example. Mrs. Paul was the choir director of the West Side Baptist Church in Beatrice, Nebraska. Her daughter Marilyn was the pianist in that church. Now, neither of them were ever late for choir practice. In fact, they were in the habit of arriving 15 minutes before it started. On Wednesday evening, March 1st, 1950, at 7 o'clock, Mrs. Paul called out to Marilyn. It was time to leave to get to the church practice. And she didn't hear anything, but she returned to this last-minute preparation for the choir practice, and the minutes ticked by. And at 7:15, she realized what time it was and that Marilyn hadn't said anything. Marilyn wasn't there. And so she called out to her and went upstairs, and sure enough, Marilyn had fallen asleep after dinner. So she woke her up, and now this was the first time that either Mrs. Paul or Marilyn had ever been late for a choir practice. But, there were 18 people, 18 members of the West Side Baptist Church Choir, and each and every one of them were late that same night. They were late for practice. Now, all of these people had perfectly valid excuses for why they weren't on time. But, for instance, the Donna Vandergrift, who was a high school sophomore, was having trouble with a geometry homework. And she kept lingering over it, trying to get this problem to work out right. Now, she was always early, but this night she was late. Rowena Estes and her sister, Sadie, were ready to leave the house on time, but the car wouldn't start. So they called up LaDonna Vandergrift and asked her to pick them up. But she was still struggling with that geometry problem, and so the sisters had to sit there and wait for her. Usually, Mrs. Schuster was 10 minutes early, but she was held up that night at her mother's house. She was detained for some reason or another. Herb Kripf was at home, but he absolutely had to finish this important letter. He had to finish writing it before he could go to choir practice. He couldn't leave it. One excuse after another, one after another. One man had been invited out for dinner, and that just ran a little late, so he didn't get there on time. And the young woman just had to hear the end of this radio program that she loved. Even the pastor and his wife, who were always early, they found themselves running behind because this watch that the pastor was very, very fond of had somehow lost 5 minutes. Now, the remaining choir members had equally valid excuses for being late. Never before had everyone been late for the 7:30 Wednesday evening choir practice. Nobody was there at 7:30 at night when it usually started. You know, if you tried to figure the odds of how, how often 18 people who usually arrived on time or early were late, I think you would have a hard time doing that. So, what was the rest of the story? It was 7:30 p.m. when a natural gas pipe leaked in the basement of the West Side Baptist Church, and it was ignited by the furnace, and the church blew up. It was demolished totally. The furnace of the West Side Baptist Church was directly beneath the choir loft. It was an empty choir loft that Wednesday night. Isn't that a neat story? I think that is so neat. It's a true story, too. You know, one of my favorite affirmations is divine order is already established. I say that to myself any number of times during the day, as well as many times having stood here and just said it out loud. Divine order is already established. When we look at our lives, when we listen to the evening news, when we read the newspaper, we don't see divine order. No, anything but. We see a lot of, anger, disagreement, chaos, pain, anguish. We see the whole thing. And we're puzzled by it. We're sometimes distressed, angered sometimes by the whys of life. Why do such things happen? Why do the negative things keep unfolding in this way? You know, we don't ask the why questions quite as often when wonderful, uplifting things, good things happen to us, do we? But when the bad things, when we see them and hear about them, or when they happen to us, oh yeah, we have to somehow ask ourselves why. Why? I keep trying to remember that we are only aware of a tiny portion of the multifaceted, multidimensional existence that we live in. There are reasons for everything. One day we'll know them. One day we will. But not usually now. That's why I think it's so important to be able to believe in and trust a God who does know it all, who's omniscient. Everything. He knows it all. That's why it's so important to be able to trust this kind of a God. You know, there's a tremendous relief to be able to believe in a God that is not only perfect goodness, but that goodness, that divine order is being played out at all times in all places, whether we see it or not. Usually, we don't see it. Very often, we do not see the reason. We don't see any divine order. But we can, without any doubt, see that divine order reigned on Wednesday night, March the 1st, 1950, at 7:30 p.m. at the West Side Baptist Church in Beatrice, Nebraska. That we can see. Apparently, these 18 people had roles to play, things to do and say, experiences to have and lessons to learn. God needed them, and they needed to be right where they were. They were in their right place. Late. If we believe that life is eternal, and in this church we absolutely do, then it isn't quite as hard when people we know, people we love, do die. As these 18 people could very easily have on March the 1st, 1950. When someone dies, I certainly try, and I hope you do, try to reason that they had carried out the roles that they needed to play. They had done the things they needed to do and said the things they needed to say. They had learned the lessons that they were capable of learning at this particular time, and so God called them home to Him. God called them home so they could continue the eternal, wonderful process of unfoldment in spirit that He created this universe to afford us. Doesn't believing that we always have and always will participate in divine life, unlimited divine life, fully, doesn't that take away at least some of the pain, some of the stress, some of the anguish and fear that is associated with death? I think so. Someone's death might be inconvenient, might be very, very painful, life-changing, shocking to lose someone that's close or just an acquaintance. But it's okay because they're okay. Everything really is well. Life is eternal. Divine order is already established. So, what else does that event at the West Side Baptist Church tell us? What it says to us is that you and me and the choir of the West Side Baptist Church and everyone else is very, very important right where they are. Each one of us is a beautiful, shining thread in the tapestry of life. You are absolutely indispensable, right where you are. Every Sunday morning, we say together, I am the individualized expression of God, and I am ever one with this perfect life, this perfect love, and perfect substance. And we remind ourselves that individualized means undivided. We are undivided from God. We are a part of God. God is omnipresent. We will always have and we will always be a part of His life. We are part of His love. We are part of everything He created. This is a universal oneness of which we take part. Oh, it is so easy to fall into the trap of defining ourselves by our work or by the amount of money we have or don't have, by who we know, by our skills, by how other people, perhaps when we were being raised, how they defined us or they taught us to define ourselves, by the kind of education we have had or not had. But if we define ourselves by the world, and especially how the world judges, we are limiting ourselves because we are equating ourselves with the least part of us, the outer part, the physical, the human part. The greatest part of us is invincible, is eternal, and is invisible. It can't be defined. It can't be defined really any more than God can be defined. And we try. We say that God is, we are love, life. We are wisdom, truth, power, understanding, knowledge, goodness, and on and on and on, because we were made in His image. That is how we have to define ourselves and everyone else. That is how. Not by how the world judges. 1 John 3:2 says, Beloved, now are we the sons of God. Not some future time, not when we're good. Now, right now. John was talking about each one of us. You know, I bet that every one of us has a little bit different take on life and death, on the hereafter. And I think it would really be fun. I don't think I've said anything like this before, but I think it would be fun if we got together and had some coffee after service and just talked about this, talked about it as a group. It would be fun to hear other people's ideas. You know, the great thing about divine science, one of the reasons why I'm still here after 50 years almost, is that one can discuss. One can share opinions. One can share ideas. There are no taboo subjects. There aren't any questions that can't be asked. Nobody takes offense because they understand that everybody has a right to their viewpoint, their opinion about God and death and life. We're absolutely free to question everything and anything, and to do so is always fun. Is always fun. We can comfort ourselves to know that amazing things really do happen. And certainly one happened in Beatrice, Nebraska in 1950. 18 people could have died that night. But they didn't. If we allow it, such events can convince us that there is an underlying plan and reason for the occurrences in life. Divine order, whether we see it or know it or not, is the basis for everything, especially probably when we can't see it. That's when we lean on it the hardest, though. But stories like this help us to learn to trust this loving presence, this infinite God, this beloved Father, despite what things look like on the surface of life. You know it's all going to work out. It really is. Things like those events in Nebraska, Beatrice, Nebraska, they help us realize that every one of us is important. We are all golden threads in this tapestry of life, whether we happen to be expressing on this plane of experience or another dimension of experience. We are, right now, all of us, sons of God, and divine order is already established. Let's go within and give thanks. No matter how it looks, there is both a reason for it and a solution to it, and that solution is a divine one. It's God in action. If this doesn't drive us, push us into talking to God and expressing our doubts or our fears or our joy or our gratitude, if we don't talk to God about it, we are excluding the most powerful source of understanding and contentment, of peace, of love that is available. Divine order is already established, whether we see it or know it or not. This day, every day, let us give thanks. Let us give thanks. Amen.